This morning we're going to look at a passage in Ruth. So let's go together to Ruth chapter 1. It's amazing to me how these stories that we know so well still always deliver something new, something deeper. And this morning we're going to dig a little bit into the original language to see something extraordinary in Naomi's language. So let's go to Ruth chapter 1, and we'll pick up the story in verse 19. This is where Naomi and Ruth arrive back in Bethlehem. So I'll read from 19 through to 22. So they both went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred about them and said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. So I want us to first of all go to 20 and 21, verses 20 and 21, and even in the translation, it is obvious that there's something interesting going on. Now, I'll draw your attention to the fact that Naomi is using two different names for God in her statement. So let's first just go and look at the translation itself. So verse 20, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, bitter, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me," the Almighty. "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." The Lord, see, it's different. "Why call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So we have these two different names of God that Naomi uses. So why would that be? Well, for us it would be important to go and look at the Hebrew words then behind the two translations. The Lord is quite obviously the word Jehovah in the Hebrew. It's been translated here as the Lord. Then the other name she uses, Almighty, is actually the name El Shaddai, one of the names of God, El Shaddai. So this name El Shaddai, what does it mean? Well, we see there in the translation that it is translated as Almighty, God Almighty. But there is a very interesting place where that word comes from. Now, in the original Hebrew, if we go to Genesis 49, verse 25, there is the root of the word Shaddai, El Shaddai, the name El Shaddai, used. So I'll read the verse to you, and maybe you want to guess the word. The word is Shaddai in Hebrew. So this is Genesis 49 and verse 25. "By the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings lying in the deep beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb." So actually we have the word appearing there as Almighty, but then later on in the verse, we have the root word. So Shaddaiim, where El Shaddai comes from, is one of the two last words there in the verse. Blessings of the breasts and of the womb. So literally, El Shaddai has the meaning of God of breasts, which means God of all provision, God of all nourishment, God of all care, sometimes also referred to as all-sufficient God. That's what the name El Shaddai means. God of all provision, God of all care, God of all nourishment, God, all-sufficient God. So now, let's get back to what Naomi is doing here. Do you see that she is actually very pointedly using that name for God? She says, El Shaddai, the God of all provision. He is not provided for me. The God of all sufficiency has brought me back empty. It's quite amazing. Since the Lord has testified against me, this is verse 21, and the Almighty, the God who is supposed to nourish me and care for me, has afflicted me. Amazing. And so we realize that in the original language, Naomi is doing something terrible here. She is basically saying, Mr. Provision has not provided for me. She pointedly uses the name, and let's be clear on something. Is she really speaking to the audience there, to the other people? Not really. Her whole speech is directed towards the living God. And you can just see the bitterness coming out of her as she spews this bitterness towards God. You, the God of all provision and care and all sufficiency, you've let me down. Wow, that's quite a serious thing to say, harsh thing to say. And we need to understand how Naomi ended up in this place, because you and I both know that we also end up in this place. But how does it happen? So, first of all, had God's name changed? Had he changed from the time that she left Bethlehem to the time that she now returns? No. His name was El Shaddai, God of all provision, care, sufficiency, before she left, and his name is still El Shaddai now, on her return. He hasn't changed. God does not change. In fact, he is today still the God of all provision, care, nourishment, sufficiency. How did she end up here? And how do we end up here? And it all comes down to Naomi's interpretation of that name, El Shaddai. God can introduce himself by this name to us. I am the God of all provision, sufficiency, nourishment. And what do? We go away with our own interpretation of that name. So immediately in our minds, we seeing food, clothing, housing, motor car, whatever we need. God will provide, and he will provide it in this, and this way. And we sort it out in our heads, and then we say that's how it's going to be. So immediately we create an expectation based on our interpretation of God's name. Isn't that incredible? That is what happened to Naomi here. She went away with a certain interpretation of what the name El Shaddai means, and created in her mind immediately a certain expectation of how that will be done and how it will work. And when it did not happen in that way, look at where she ends up. So bitter. Just full of bitterness towards God. But he was still the God of all sufficiency. It was her understanding that she went away with. That was where her problem started. And it's exactly the same with us. We all have our own interpretation of the meaning of that name of God. So now we realize from this that God, and if we look a little bit deeper now, just follow me carefully here. I'm thinking that God was actually taking her on a journey to bring her to the place of realizing that He Himself is her nourishment, her provision, and her provider, all rolled into one. What all happened to Naomi? Let's face it, it's terrible. She immigrates to Moab looking for food, looking for nourishment. So initially we see, there is trust in Moab. Let's go to Moab because there's food there. So the next thing that happens is she loses her husband, and then she loses the 2 sons. And for a woman in her position in that time, my word, you're destitute. And so God slowly but surely erodes her provision, the sources of her provision. Do you see? And I look at this and I go, wow, Naomi, you're missing what God is trying to do. You saying he didn't give you what you needed. In fact, He took from you. You were full, now you're empty. He has emptied you. But you don't realize that all the while He was working and He was trying to get you to the place where you realize, oh my, you are my provision. You have given me exactly what I needed. It was just not according to my definition, my interpretation at all. It was according to yours. And that's the key. We need to ask God to introduce Himself to us again, but not for us to go away with our interpretation of the name. We want His interpretation of His name. Lord, You are the God of all provision, all sufficiency, all nourishment. You will give me exactly what you need, but what You think I need. And we need to stay away from that whole area of attaching our own meaning and our own interpretation to His name. So it is my prayer for myself and my prayer for all of you that we do ask God to introduce Himself to us all over again and say, Lord, forgive me. I have been bitter against You. Perhaps you're bitter against God even now for something that He's done that according to your definition of things is just not on. Well, He's never changed. Isn't that wonderful? He never changes. He is who He says He is. Isn't that wonderful? You can count on Him. He's completely consistent. But ask Him to teach you His definition of His names. Amen.